We discuss the dangers of paranormal investigations as well as the true nature of residual hauntings with author Mark Hunnemann on this week's Spirit Answers podcast. Hey, well, today we have back on the podcast Mark Hunnemann, and I'm so excited to have him on again. He was on before. His book is, let me try to get it in the camera there, Seeing Ghosts Through God's Eyes, so with the subtitle, A Worldview Analysis of Earthbound Spirits. And so we had Mark on before with a really fascinating conversation. If you haven't had a chance to listen to it, it was on the topic of his book, which is the true identity of the ghost phenomenon. And today we are fortunate enough to have him back on for a two-parter. And so the first part we're gonna get started with is some of the effects that people are experiencing from doing paranormal investigations. And then we're gonna round out the interview with a discussion on the true nature of residual hauntings. So, Mark, it's a pleasure to have you back on. Thank you for joining us.
Really, the pleasure is all mine, Alex. Thank you for the honor of being on here. Appreciate it very much.
Absolutely. So as we get started here, I guess we can go ahead and just dive right into what is going on in some of these cases of these paranormal investigations where people are having some effects. First off, I guess, how did you find out that this is going on?
If I may use a phrase, from the horse's mouth, from people who were themselves and still are paranormal investigators. I remember having a conversation with, I don't know if you ever heard of Dave Schrader.
Oh, yeah.
Pretty well known name. Years ago, I was on his podcast, and he agreed. He said that the deep, dark secret of the paranormal community is how much illness, suffering, and just general problems there are that come with paranormal investigating, and across the board in every area of life. So it's comes from not just from Dave, but from numerous people in the field who were honest and were hurting and just confided in me.
So in your research then, is this are these effects strictly happening in communities of ghost investigations, or is it more wide ranging than that?
Good question. Yeah, it's definitely not just paranormal investigators. Anybody who is, in a sense, trying to either access or use the paranormal or supernatural realm in an unlawful, unbiblical way is opening themselves up to harmful effects. And a couple examples I can think of would be, for example, Reiki, which you're very familiar with. And I can think of like mediums, folks are into spiritualism. Laura Maxwell, whom we've talked about, her and her mom were deeply involved in a spiritualist church in Scotland, in Glasgow, for many years, about 20 some years ago, 20 to 30 years. And it was not uncommon for, they began to notice among the mediums and the psychics and so forth, for them to start to develop serious mental issues.
Wow.
And Laura's mom herself was committed to a mental asylum and ended up committing suicide. Though she was saved, she still was battling a horrible scarring effect from it. So really, it's wide open. And the field gets broader and broader, as you know. Any field like tarot cards, the whole gamut. Once you start trying to access a forbidden realm and trying to access forbidden knowledge, you're opening yourself up to a demonic attachment and hence attack.
And you kind of alluded to it already there in your answer, but in terms of what the actual effects are, then are you noticing a skew in one particular area? Does it seem to mostly be in the emotional realm of these individuals? Is it a physical effect, a combination? What have you noticed as far as what these effects are?
Yeah, very frequently I found it to be emotional, but it really runs the gamut, Alex. From in fact, in all the dozens of cases I was involved in, um, there was hardly a single one where the relationship was not adversely affected by the presence of the spirits that were in the house, and where there was, true paranormal or supernatural activity or demonic activity. They, so you got relational, got physical, emotional, financial, just really across the board. Um, uh, the damage that can be done is as vast as the demonic creativity and wreaking havoc as they seek to steal, kill, and destroy. So it's pretty sobering.
Yeah, and that really makes me think. I know I've touched on this in a couple of the interviews so far, which is that the enemy has been around for a long time and is really, really good at disguising himself in a way that is hard for people, especially in the secular community, or people that are relying solely on uh, human wisdom, quote human wisdom, to detect. I think that the enemy is smart enough to know that for example, like schizophrenia or hallucinations, a lot of that now can be quote written off in the psychological or scientific community as simply physical ailments or mental ailments, and the enemy knows that the spiritual component of this is unfortunately overlooked in a lot of cases, and I think that the enemy exploits that, which is very, very unfortunate. And I also just to your point about the relationships, that was another thing that I noticed during my time, dabbling in the occult and in the New Age, is that it seems like so many individuals that experiment in this realm have relational difficulties, and I think it kind of comes back to what we find in the Word of God, which is that relationships and healthy relationships are so important to God, and as we see that in the Trinity itself. And I think that the
Yeah,
enemy is so focused on doing whatever he can do to destroy relationships, and I just saw it time and time again, just whether that was friendships or romantic relationships, they just fell apart so often, and it just seemed like there was strife occurring at such a high level there. So
yeah.
I appreciate you
Mm,
saying that.
that's well said, Alex. Yeah.
So are you aware of any of these
Uh,
effects then overlapping with people in the Christian community, or is this kind of just solely delegated to people that are going into these investigations kind of unarmed, so to speak, and they don't really know what they're getting into?
well, it it'd be disingenuous for me to say that Christian deliverance ministers, exorcists, whatever you want to call them, are immune to attacks. But it's though we do have the armor of God, um, God in His mysterious good providence sometimes does allow um, folks who get involved in frontline ministry, who have really a target on their back, um, to for them and their loved ones to experience weird things, things that go bump in the night, um, and to sometimes get scratched or or something, something like that. But generally speaking, the armor of God will protect. But the more, I guess, the more a person gets immersed into more serious type cases like exorcisms, which I was never, I only did involved in one or two of those, and a lot of oppression cases, which really borderline possession. But uh, to answer your question, yeah, be honest, there are times where I have, and I know most people who are on the front line um, get some kind of reminder,
Hmm.
that somebody doesn't like them. Put it
Yeah.
that way.
Yeah. Um, as far as these effects themselves, then, in your experience, how do people recover from them, or do they often recover from them? What's your research shown you?
Yeah, gosh, we could do a long thing about that with your background in Reiki, because I know some people have a healing, but it comes at a high cost. Um, some people are. It's different for different people, Alex. Some people are who develop uh, problems, heart problems. I've known a fair number of people who are on the front lines of deliverance ministry who develop heart problems. Just so happened I had heart problems before I got even involved. But in the name of Jesus, once that demonic attachment is gone, then it can range in gradations from instant healing, full instant healing, to gradual full healing, to partial healing, to God and His providence allowing whatever it was that um, ailment that came along to stay. So, because sometimes it gets hazy, and you alluded to this, is the devil can and his minions can piggyback on real emotional and physical ailments, just like we see in the Bible at times. So sometimes it's hard to extricate, um, you know, true organic schizophrenia, for example, from a demonic uh, originated one. And so that's the tactic I have found, is that they can just take a pre-existing condition um, and cause it to worsen. And so it's person specific, really. But it's through Christ for there to be true lasting healing, though, Alex.
Yeah, well said. And I'm so happy that you took the time today to talk to us about this, because I think that this is something, um, as I think I alluded to it earlier, is so it's so underreported. It seems like, especially in the paranormal community, it seems like so much of what goes on there is it's 95% of it is focused on the fun, the fun that can be had from it, and kind of the thrill seeking aspects of it. But these really important issues, these effects seem to be very kind of just tossed away under the rug, so to speak. And I think that we need to do whatever we can to kind of get the word out there more, that this is serious here. This is not just going out to a sporting event. This is that once you start messing it with the spiritual realm, that a lot of serious things can happen. And that's not, I'm not trying to scare anybody, but I just think that we are, as a society, really underselling the true nature of what's going on here. And even myself, just as a small example here, even since I've started doing these interviews for the podcast, I've even noticed a couple of things happen myself. I've had a cupboard open and shut behind me on its own. I had and I was fully awake at night when this happened. I had a whistling, it sounded like from a man, come from another room, twice. And when I went, and at first I thought maybe there was something in the room that could have caused that, and it turns out that there wasn't. And I went it was the next couple of days on YouTube, just to see what other, quote, ghosts, or, as we've discussed earlier, that what demonic whistling sounds like. And it was the exact same whistle that I heard in the other room. So I've had a few of these instances myself since just starting this. And I'm just I just think it's interesting, because when I came into this interview with you, I wasn't thinking about myself as it relates to this phenomena and these effects. And while it might be a little bit different than what we talked about today in terms of some of these emotional or physical effects, there is it definitely appears as if there's something going on the other side that doesn't appreciate what's going on, and that's okay, because as you and I both know, that the blood of Christ is stronger than that, and the creator of all, including the enemy, is stronger than that. But just some really interesting effects going on. And I just want people to know, again, I'm not trying to scare anybody, but I just really think it's important to show a holistic framework of what can happen if you get into the spiritual realm. So
that's interesting, Alex.
Yeah,
It does not surprise me a bit that you've experienced exactly what you said. Um, God giving them just the devil is God's devil, uh, and he's on God's chain, but
absolutely.
he's still a roaring lion. And if we start to expose what I think is one of his most effective deceptive tactics, namely the paranormal in general and ghosts in particular, then he's not going to appreciate that, because he knows that the truth will set people free, and deception enslaves people. So yeah, it's doesn't surprise me that you've had a cupboard or two, or a whistle or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, moving on then to our second topic, which is a topic that you cover very extensively, both in your book, Seeing Ghosts Through God's Eyes, and also on your YouTube channel. And we'll share at the end of this where everybody can access both the book and the YouTube channel. We're going to talk about residual hauntings. And just for, I'm sure that there are many people are already familiar with the term residual haunting. But for those who aren't, can you kind of give us a brief understanding of what a residual haunting is?
Yeah, yeah. I had to kind of reread my own book. uh, so I approached it with fear and trembling, because it's I really want to do this and really adequately. And I think he did about 10 episodes that are on different aspects of it on my YouTube channel. But here we go. Um, just as far as introduction, Alex, to what residual haunts are. Um, Residual haunts come about through residual energy. The residual energy is the cause, and the haunt is the effect. Um, we all know that for there to be an effect, there has to be an antecedent cause. So in this situation, and the reason why it's significant and why I wrote about it just briefly in my book is because, at least for many paranormal investigators, um, they would say that the majority of haunts, there's four kinds of haunts: the intelligent ghost haunt, residual haunt, poltergeist, and demonic. And the residual haunt is really not a paranormal. It's not really not paranormal or supernatural. It's said to be purely natural forces at work. So here's the picture of just the initial definition, because I appreciate the fact that you don't want to assume any prior knowledge, um, and just to refresh people's memories, including my own. And that is that residual energy is said, it's the hypothesis in the paranormal community that at moments of high tension or emotional energy, for example, during uh, a murder, be an extreme example, that this energy would um, make an imprint on the surrounding environment. It would cluster there, and then some prodding, which we'll talk about, I think, shortly, would then cause a haunting, which would, it's kind of like a tape recorder playing back. So there you have the residual energy that is being imprinted on the environment from some traumatic event or some high energy event. Doesn't have to be traumatic, but and then this would then lead to a haunting, which could be apparitional, or it could be smells, it could be bells, the sound of a gunshot, it could be, virtually anything. So that's it in a simple nutshell. Does that make sense?
That was, yeah, very well said, and I think you encompassed a lot there. An answer that was both very informational but also brief. So I appreciate that. And this next question actually kind of brings us back to your book, and kind of really right away throws a wrench in what you kind of described there with the general definition of residual haunting as it's talked about in the paranormal community, which is that when these quote residual hauntings are confronted in the name of Jesus Christ, something happens, from what I understand, Mark. And can you kind of elaborate on that?
Yes, that's something that was that is empirically verifiable, and that's something that I believe that near the end of the book, I challenge people gently to uh, check it out, and that is that if you have a true paranormal haunting, supernatural haunting, and it's if it's people think it's residual though, 100 out of 100 times, if you rebuke it in the name of Jesus, this supposed non-intelligent residual energy will suddenly become very intelligent, agitated, and depending upon the situation, will either attack or leave. But yeah, it does not jive with um, paranormal communities' uh, idea of what residual energy is. It'd be sort of like saying me talking to the space heater, the energy that's coming out of it, and saying, in the name of Jesus, stop. And it's stopping, it's because it's just pure energy, right?
Right.
And that's all residual energy is said to be, is just pure energy playing back. So, yeah, rebuking energy in the name of Jesus should not have any effect unless it's a demon. And that's why I'm just absolutely convinced 100% that there's no such thing as residual energy, because every single time, and I'm talking almost 100 cases, um, and almost every time going in, the clients thought that at least in part, if not mainly, it was residual. And but when it was rebuked in the name of Christ, it either made itself known, or I have found that when I rebuke things or something like that, they don't always scream and make their presence known in wild and crazy ways, Hollywood style, but they get gone. Or sometimes they do. You see a shadow fly out the door, or through the ceiling or something like that. or a dark, or I mean, hot wind or something like that. Some kind of sign of their exiting. So yeah, it shouldn't happen.
Yeah, yeah, that's incredible. All of a sudden, this quote non-intelligent energy starts to, as you said, attack. Just at the powerful name of Jesus Christ. This again, I kind of like we were talking about before, just really understated and very sadly understated in the paranormal community. Um,
Yeah.
and it kind of playing back into what we were talking about before too, as far as the nature of the residual haunting. Many times it's reported that these hauntings, the energy itself somehow remembers important dates, or emits smells, or just it displays other types of in what you would assume to come from something with intelligence. So, can you just kind of expand on a little bit of what that means in terms of the residual haunting itself, how it might not be exactly what the paranormal community might say it is, kind of relates to what your
Yeah.
hypothesis is?
I'll try to keep this one short as well. Okay, and you can probe further if you desire. Uh, Anniversaries have no ontology, no being. They're nothing. No, don't get me wrong. Anniversaries are important, but you get what I'm saying. An anniversary has no ontological status. It's not something that can be measured or weighed. It is in one sense nothing. It is a memorable date to two or more people. So it can't act as a physical trigger supposedly to uh, how could something that's nothing trigger energy to summon itself to on a yearly or annual basis to put on a sound or light show when like I said, it has no ontological status. It's just a date in people's minds. Um, that's the short answer for that. Uh, we can go off in different directions. Let me throw this out too, though.
Sure.
If you think about, well, let me come back to this because when we talk about thermodynamics and uh, residual energy, yeah, let me hold off
Sure.
on that.
Well, another aspect of the residual haunting, that ties back to that definition that we started off with, is the idea that these residual hauntings are caused by a traumatic event that happens in the environment at some point in history. Um, but there's an interesting caveat here, which is that many of these residual hauntings that are reported are not traumatic events. They're actually like people walking through a room, or sometimes it's just people maybe dancing or something like that.
Yeah,
Can you kind of explain what's going on there?
yeah, that's problematic for traditional ghost theory, which has typically said that the primary reason why a human being would become earthbound is because of what we talked about last time, some traumatic death, um, unfinished business, um, let's see, premature death, that type of thing, and really some deeply emotional aspects related to a person's death. And but as you point out, many of the recordings, um, audio and video, are of very mundane activities. And I remember a guy named, forgive me if I mispronounce his name, from Ghost Village, Jeff Belanger.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Um, he's one authority I could appeal to, but it's not just him. I've seen it myself, and a lot of evidence that I've come across, and that is that the activity that's been caught on tape has seemingly nothing to do with any traumatic death or even death at all. It's just like you mentioned, people just walking around like they're doing their daily chores in the kitchen. And so that throws a wrench, or at least gives pause to one of the most basic of ghost theory formation, right? So that's I'll leave it at that. It's a good question, and it's just simply problematic because it goes against the grain of, you wouldn't expect it. And I'm not sure if you were about to ask this, but the thing is that the vast majority of the vast majority of traumatic deaths do not, I repeat, do not result in the leaving behind of some kind of imprint, which then results in a haunting, because people are dying every day. Where we have little children, the unborn, being killed every day by the thousands and the millions each year. I can't think of a more traumatic event in God's eyes than that. And that should, in every case, if ghost theory is true, leave some kind of traumatic residual energy at that abortion clinic. And because that's the most defenseless of people. So there's forgiveness for all in Jesus. But I guess that's it right now.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate you bringing that up, because that's actually where I was going with that. And you would think that if this was something that was, as many in the paranormal community claim to be, which is something that we can kind of measure in a scientific way, or not quite a scientific way, but forgive me, I'm forgetting the term right now. Is it parapsychological? Parapsychologist?
Yes.
Yeah, if you could measure it in that way, you would expect for there to be more continuity here as it relates to the traumatic events and what causes a residual haunting, but there seems to be no rhyme or reason. And in terms of the unfortunate nature of reality, which is that there, like you said, there are very many traumatic events that happen on a daily basis, and it seems to be that almost none of these cases, quote, cause a residual haunting. So just some really interesting food for thought, and I'm really happy.
Yeah, I mean, how can you sorry to
go ahead.
Interject, but how can you posit something how can we posit something as a scientific theory that in the vast majority of cases doesn't even hold true in the laboratory of life?
Right, 100%. And another aspect of this is the period clothing that many people now report in these residual hauntings. Period clothing is many times is as in Victorian era clothing that these entities are presenting during these residual haunts. However, you make a really interesting point on your YouTube channel, and you state that actually, according to one study, period style clothing wasn't even seen in these quote residual hauntings until about 100 years ago. Can you kind of explain that?
Yeah, but only if you'll help me out.
Yeah,
because I want to work together with you on this one. Because as far as I know, it only came. I only mentioned that not as kind of proof, it was just sort of an aside. I forget where I even mentioned it, but I thought it was interesting enough to at least um, add to the accumulating evidence. Um, the people seemed, I can't even remember the group, but they seemed to be very intelligent and competent. And the claim that they made was that up to 100 years ago, people, when there was an apparition, that apparition would generally appear in the clothes of the era that the people were living in at that time. But for some reason, that that policy or that practice
Yeah.
changed.
Yeah.
And if ghosts are what people say they are, earthbound spirits, then that should not. I mean, who's dictating clothing, apparel?
Right.
Is
Right.
it, or is it the devil who's picking up on the fact that um, people are just find Victorian ghosts to be a little bit more attractive or exciting or something along those lines? And that's really as far as I can take it, Alex, because I only got it from that one article. I don't know if it, I mean, it has the ring of truth to it, but whether it's really how much truth there is to it, I honestly don't know. I'd like to do more research on that one. But you got any thoughts on it? Because I'd like to see what you think.
Yeah, and I appreciate your transparency on that. It's a really really interesting anecdote there, and I think there is a lot of truth to it because a couple things. One is that I'm pretty sure I had listened to thousands of hours of probably thousands of hours of material on the paranormal before I gave my life to Jesus. And I'm pretty sure at some point when I was listening to some of that material that I had heard that come up from the paranormal community, the idea that it wasn't until recently as we started to see in the paranormal investigations, Victorian era clothing be the mainstay there as it relates to ghost investigations. And from what I understand, before this, there was never anything. There was never an equivalent. I'm pretty sure that they've touched on this, and I've never seen anything that would prove that there was an equivalent. Like, in 100 years ago, it wasn't like they were seeing ghosts from the 1700s, or and it goes on. And this also makes me think a little bit too about what's going on right now as it relates to the UFO phenomenon, because this is another phenomena here that didn't really start until recently, and not until it was like the last really 70 years or so when it started to really pick up. And of course it happened to coincide when humanity started to become more invested in exploring space and starting to send ships out into space. And before this, it seemed like a lot of the what we now find in quote UFO encounters was happening in different aspects, like different monsters I think about, or different aspects of folklore. Especially it seems like different types of cryptids, or like fairies and things like that, were really the popular thing for a long time in terms of what happened in these supernatural encounters. But now it's really shifted to aliens, and I think that really plays to your point, Mark, in talking about what is going to be the most kind of the most appealing for the average person as they're delving into these paranormal events or the supernatural. Because I think that the devil, he knows that humans were created in a sense that we long for a spiritual life, and if we don't feel that ourselves, he's going to try to fill that for us through some of these paranormal encounters or taking us on a long winding trail to quote find the truth, whether that be in aliens or some of these ghosts, these residual haunting encounters, because what it does is it feeds into a part of our being that wants more. We want to know why we're here. As, you know, most humans want to know why we're here. What happens to us when we die? What's the nature of reality? What's the meaning of life? And a lot of these encounters claim to have the answer, or at least can get you to the answer, or at least provide part of the answer. So I just think.
Have you noticed the evolution of the UFOs, that they used to be from Mars, but since we now know something about Mars, they're no longer from Mars anymore.
Great point. Absolutely, absolutely, and that I think that speaks to exactly what we're talking about. I just see the goalposts just keep to be shifting more and more as time passes, and unless you're really aware and focusing on this, it's hard to notice it, because so many people are just they're so focused. And I understand why, because I used to be one of them. You're so focused on the supernatural aspect of it, or the the magic of it, the thrill of it, that you kind of lose sight of of some of the facts here. So I don't mean to put put anybody down, or say anybody is less than, because that's what they are. That's their background, that they come from, that they're someone that likes to investigate these things. I'm just saying that I think it's important to really take a step back, if we can, and take a look at the whole picture, as it relates to what it is that's going on from a historical standpoint, not just what's going on right now, in the nature of the paranormal. So really interesting.
The evolution of both UFOs, aliens, and ghosts. Demons learn from us, and they are the supreme opportunistic predators. And they know and are students of what our beliefs and practices are. And if they can piggyback on what we believe, and they know, as you mentioned, you didn't use a term, but you stated it more clearly probably than I will, is that we are made homo religiosus, which means that we simply have a God shaped hole in our soul. As St. Augustine said, that God, you made us for yourself, and we are restless until we find our rest in thee. And people in the Western materialistic world are looking for magic, not necessarily with the K, just looking for some supernatural reality. And so hence they'll go off looking for Bigfoot or UFOs, ghosts, that type of thing, because it temporarily gives a thrill and taps into, kind of gives an electrical charge to that visceral desire for spiritual reality. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You kind of mentioned it earlier. One of the most interesting parts of your, I think you mentioned this in the book, and you definitely mentioned it on your YouTube channel, of your look into the residual haunt, is looking at it from the vantage point of thermodynamics. So can you kind of go into a little bit of that for us? How does thermodynamics, how do thermodynamics come into play here with residual hauntings?
Okay. Well, let me give an illustration first before I forget.
Sure.
What is the greatest display of energy in nature? It's lightning, right?
Uh-huh.
About 1,000,000 volts, as I understand it. I may be wrong, but it's somewhere around there. Once lightning strikes a tree, let's say in your front yard, how many seconds does it take for, after the lightning strikes that tree, to pass for you to be able to touch that tree without being electrocuted after 1,000,000 volts hit it?
I actually don't know. I thought it was pretty quick. Is it not? Does it take a little
No,
while?
no, you hit the nail on the head.
Oh, okay.
Probably about 1 second, if less.
Okay. Uh,
So my point, that was my entree. If you have 1,000,000 volts that hit something and it dissipates that quickly to where you can touch the dang thing a second later and maybe feel a little warmth in it,
yeah.
but not get shocked, your hair not stand on end.
Right.
Then that's kind of my entree to thermodynamics. Another illustration would be if you take a glass of water, right, and a clear glass of water, and you put a drop or two of red food coloring in it, and you set it down carefully. I did this in one of my YouTube videos to illustrate thermodynamics, and not agitate it, don't shake it at all, just gently put it down. What you'll notice without shaking or anything like that is within 2 or 3 minutes, it will, those 2 or 3 drops will have dispersed throughout the entire container. And what that illustrates is the second and third laws of thermodynamics. Now, paranormal investigators are quick to appeal to the first law of thermodynamics to affirm their ghost theory. That's the law of conservation. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can be evolved into different forms, but it can't be created or destroyed. However, what they frequently um, overlook or don't take into um, much consideration as they should is the second and third laws, and that is entropy, the second law, that as soon as the energy is let out of the container, uh, then it will immediately start to dissipate. And then the third law is that it will dissipate until equilibrium, like in the glass. However, in this case, imagine if you put 2 or 3 drops in the ocean. Is it destroyed? Is that food coloring that you put in the ocean destroyed? No, not really. But it is so incredibly watered down in the Atlantic or the Pacific Ocean that it's virtually destroyed. It's non-usable,
Right.
right? It's so dispersed. And so the idea of the second law of thermodynamics and why it undercuts and why I think it contravenes the notion of residual energy and thus residual haunts is that it's considered by most scientists to be an absolute law, no known exceptions. And that is the idea that once the once energy is emitted from its container, then it cannot remain clustered. It cannot remain clustered. It must begin entropy immediately, and unless it's exercised upon by some outside force. And so, and then it would dissipate into equilibrium. So if you take a typical paranormal case in which, let's say it's Gettysburg again, which we mentioned last time, what's the container, so to speak? Well, if you have let's assume ghost theory for a second. Okay, you
Sure.
got an 18-year-old boy who dies a premature, a horrific death, unfinished business. It fits all the criteria, the death criteria. So hence you supposedly have residual energy causing holographic images of Civil War soldiers running through the woods, which would outdo anything that we have in CG and holographic imagery by man-made intelligence, all because of supposedly what happens is that when this energy, as we talked about earlier, is emitted during a time of high emotion, it supposedly sticks to the environment, let's say a rock. Well, according to, say, a law of thermodynamics, it can't do that. It can't, because all energy, and by the way, emotional energy is not a form of known energy. There's like 6 forms of energy, as I recall, but emotional energy is not one. That's one that was created by the paranormal community. There's true emotions and there's true energy, but there's no such thing as emotional energy that can be emitted and then clusterized in an environment. And that's just totally assumed by people when it's utterly contrary to the second and third laws of thermodynamics, which state that any energy, if there was any energy that was emitted during this act of, traumatic act, then that energy, whatever it was, should have dissipated immediately, just like that lightning. And if, again, 1,000,000 volts dissipates in a second, then this emotional energy, how little it is you can poof, it
Right.
should be gone. It's like the food coloring in the ocean, because the container in this case is not a little glass. It's the entire atmosphere, 100 miles high, and goes around the whole globe, and so forth. And if people say, well, if it got deposited in the stream because paranormal activity and residual activity is highlighted by streams as such, well, streams tend to move by definition.
Mm-hmm.
And if a death happened 2 feet off the side of a bridge, then that energy, again, following ghost logic, if it dropped into the water, it's downstream, a couple miles, within 2 or 3 hours. So the point is simple, but hopefully it's profound. And I'm trying to state it in a way that a layperson like myself can understand, because I'm not a scientist, but I have studied philosophy and logic, and so I know I can study propositions and see if people are making proper deductions from the evidence. And so I have seen I haven't seen anybody respond to my arguments thus far. If they have, I just haven't seen it. They may have. The one person I mentioned, but he didn't mention anything about the thermodynamics that I recall. But that's it in a nutshell. Is that if you think of the second and third laws of thermodynamics, is antithetical to the whole notion of residual energy and thus residual haunts. They just cannot jive with each other. Does that make sense, Al? So should I say it another way?
No, that makes really good sense to me. And again, I think you did a great job of explaining it in a way that is both informational, but also is in a way that, I'm not a scientist. I'm pretty far away from that, but I followed exactly what you're saying. And I think it's also just, I just want to commend you again for taking a look at it from this vantage point, because this is something that I had never heard of before. I stumbled upon your book, and again, I've had a lot of time and spent a lot of time studying the paranormal, and just a really interesting vantage point, different way to look at it. And I think it really lends to your point as well, just as that if these laws are being violated here, then the only thing I could think of that would allow that to happen is some kind of an X factor, another variable, which I think would very, very likely show that there's some kind of an intelligence here, as what we've been talking about, obviously. So, just a really powerful way, I think, to look at it. And you mentioned something as it relates to the residual haunting being cast into stone, and I know you've also touched on specifically limestone in your videos, YouTube videos, and as it relates to limestone, because limestone, from the paranormal community's way of looking at it, seems to be a particular stone that really is good at absorbing this energy for residual hauntings. However, you were really astute to point out that if this were the case, then you would expect for these pieces of limestone that are supposedly grafted to this residual energy to be able to replicate some of this residual phenomenon in a lab setting, but that hasn't happened, uh, as far as I know, ever. And so, have you had mentioned that you hadn't heard any responses as it relates to the law of thermodynamics? Has anybody responded to the really good claim that you made about the limestone, as it relates to not being replicated in a lab?
No.
Wow. Okay.
No,
Well.
not that I know of. Okay, Alex.
Uh-huh.
If you take, for example, um, I wanted to come back to this, but if you take the limestone theory, um, not all paranormal people buy into it, limestone being the primary conductor of residual energy, but a lot do. But let's say you cut away a big piece of what is, known to be, um, a wall that was associated with horrible things that happened in the castle, right?
Right.
Um, and you bring it into a lab, and it does have, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing this right, piezoelectric qualities, which just means it can, transmit electricity or, vibrate. Um, but that doesn't have any bearing on its ability to clusterize energy. But my point, Alex, that you were alluding to is that if this was a scientific hypothesis and the limestone was containing this clustered energy, then you would think that some kind of electrical prods attached to it, electrodes, positive and negative on each side, or something more complicated, should be able to replicate what is said to be 100% physical phenomenon. There's nothing paranormal, they say, about these residual things. It's purely a physical phenomenon. And when people start trying to explain the mystery of it by appealing to the paranormal laws, they're a special pleading, because this is no. This is said to be totally a natural phenomenon. So yeah, I don't know of anybody attempting or explaining how that, why it can't be replicated. And when the thing starts to accumulate like that, where you can't replicate it in the lab, and most of the traumatic events don't turn into haunts in the laboratory of life, at some point you begin to scratch your head and say, you know, this is, we need to start thinking that this is beginning to look like a Ptolemaic system. Just too many problems. We need a Copernican revolution in how we view this energy, but people are averse to and are wedded to their beliefs, which I know you're going to get to in a moment.
Yeah, yeah. And right before we do, another interesting aspect of this is many of the people that we have been talking about here as it relates to the paranormal community, um, they do believe in demons. And that's interesting because many of the people that do believe in demons also believe in the deceptive nature of demons and their ability to mimic other phenomena. So I'm wondering if you have heard from the paranormal side of things, the community there, how do they distinguish then between a residual haunt and a manifestation as it relates to demonic being? Is there any way to distinguish there between the two in the paranormal community's eyes that you've heard of?
Yes. And actually, I wrote down 9, if I can read them off real quickly.
Yes.
Okay. And this would go not only residual versus demonic, but they're trying to distinguish between residual and just intelligent in general. So that would include ghosts, right? So kind of
Right.
killing two birds with one stone. And so I actually have one video entitled Problems Distinguishing Between Intelligent and Residual Haunts. And so the first way, Alex, that many folks, dear folks in the paranormal community, try to distinguish between the two is via EVP or its equivalent. You take the flashlight test or that type of thing. And if there is an intelligent reply, then obviously it's intelligent, which means it may be demonic or may be a ghost. You have to remember, I think that for most paranormal investigators, not all, but most, assume that it's not demonic unless proven otherwise, which is sad. Because you then have to bend over backwards to give evidence that shouldn't have to be given. Anyway, okay, so if you have if you have an EVP that doesn't sound very convincing, or if it's garbled or doesn't make any sense, then that's automatically or frequently considered out of the gate to be residual. For the problem with that is, what if a person, well, you almost have to be omniscient about the history of the house you're investigating to not know for sure that comment doesn't have some kind of meaning. For example, I gave this one, and that is that suppose a person goes into a house and they ask the question, who used to live here? No answer. And then 5 minutes later, they get an EVP that says AC power. And they scratch their head and they say, that's residual. That makes no doggone sense. But then they turn around, when they've done history on the house, they realize that Tesla, who created AC energy, had stayed there for a few months. So again, this is an example. You almost have to be omniscient to deny that, or to be utterly certain that all EVPs that don't seem on the surface to be intelligent, may have a lot of intelligence behind them after all. Okay, then the second one I find a little more humorous, and that is that moving cold spots versus stationary cold spots. That is, a moving cold spot is indicative of an intelligent haunt, whereas a stationary cold spot is indicative of residual energy. Now, I want to ask a simple question, brother. I know you're intelligent. You're very intelligent. You are sitting still right now, right?
That's right.
You are. We're both sitting still,
That's right.
but I assume that we're both intelligent,
That's right.
right?
That's right.
So,
I never heard of that.
so it's possible to be, it's possible to remain still and still be intelligent. So,
I hope so.
so
My
to use
goodness.
that as a test, it just makes me laugh.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that is
So I mean,
fascinating. I
so
never
I'm
heard of that.
sorry for laughing. I mean, not laughing at them. So it's possible to be intelligent and to stand still too, um, and to bring it to seriousness for a demon
Right.
to have
Right.
a stationary cold spot. All right. Then thirdly, uh, there, and this just it kind of shows how there's no uniformity to tests for uh, whether or not something is intelligent. But for many people, if you hear footsteps or knocks, um, that's residual. And I just scratched my head and I'm thinking, what? I mean, that's often the case for the beginnings of a very, very intelligent home. Um, but I know other people who would take it the other way. So I'll just move on. The fourth test would be, are these paranormal phenomenon, say like the doors opening, is it a regular pattern and a regular basis? Most people thrive on having some kind of schedule, and so a regular pattern is something. If there's like at 3 o'clock in the morning knockings on triple knock, um, that's another thing, but to me it's not persuasive. And then orbs, good old orbs. Again, this one is up for grabs, because I know some paranormal investigators, and I'm talking about not just what's obvious dust, but something that's really weird looking, seems to be emitting its own light source, and some will automatically assume that that is a evidence of intelligence. Others will automatically assume it's residual. I remember watching a TV show. I won't mention the guy's name. I respect him, and he was a Christian, but there was all this evidence, Alex, of, I can't remember all because it's been years, but it was um, just a multiplicity of evidence of demonic presence and activity. But just because an orb flew in front of the screen, he snapped his finger and said, "Residual." And I said, "Okay."
Wow.
Gotcha. And then other people will do the appeal to, I've been doing this for 30 or 40 years. And so therefore I can just tell, I can just tell that I have this ability to discern the difference between negative and positive spirits, or intelligent or non-intelligent spirits. And again, I don't like to use the word negative. We are living in a sentimental age where we don't like to use the word like evil. They're evil spirits, not negative spirits. But anyway, this is one field, Alex, one field where longevity of experience does not equal wisdom. Because the longer a person is disobeying God's moral law and plunging into the paranormal realm, the more their discerning abilities is being turned inside out. and that's just a sad fact. And so instead of 40 years experience giving you greater wisdom, it tends to lead to actually less wisdom, because you become more ensconced, more deceived, more mentally blinded by the evil one. And hence, just so again, that doesn't work. That one doesn't work either. And see what else. Yeah, mediums. Some people will appeal to mediums to determine whether or not something is residual or demonic or just intelligent. But we have to remember, Alex, that demons are the masters of the psychic airways, not mediums. Demons are the masters of the psychic airways. And as I said earlier, they're the supreme opportunistic predators. And they prey upon our beliefs and our practices of the investigators. And so they'll work with people's ideas and then try to mimic them to put into the medium's minds what they want. You know, they can funnel into the medium's minds ideas, mental images, and so on, and they can go on all day long. Familiar spirits, as some of these demons are called, you know, can be communicating with the mediums and trying to again deceive the paranormal investigators, because mediums are supposedly the last line of defense, right? They are the supposed masters of discerning, or in fact, like I said, it's the demons who are the masters of the psychic airwaves and not psychics. They've been around a long time, and they know how to do that. And then lastly, if paranormal investigators assume or presuppose that the presence of the demonic must be accompanied with sulfur smells, intensified rage, crucifixes flying across the room, that type of thing, Hollywood stuff, then they're going to be misled as well, because like we talked about last time, there can be what I call a happy haunt. It's not really happy, but on the surface it's happy. But there's that cancerous, spiritually cancerous presence there, without all the smells and bells of the Hollywood version of what we think of, you know, when there's a possession. When there's a true full-blown possession, you can expect some crazy stuff to go on. But there's like 3 stages. You have an infestation, oppression, and then possibly possession. So, but, you know, if you're going to assume that there's going to be just these Hollywood effects, then you're going to be led astray, because they can, you know, we talked about it last time, 2 Corinthians 11:14, of the Satan appearing as the angel of light, and he doesn't have to smell like sulfur. He can bring literally the smell of roses, and all that glitters is not gold in the paranormal realm. And like, what he desires is the opposite of shalom. He'll bring, you know, hell on earth eventually. But in the meantime, he can make it seem, like we said, happy and holy. Seem that way. So many people have been deceived by, as I keep saying, we cannot accurately identify a paranormal entity by observation. We cannot accurately identify a supernatural entity just by observation because of the um, angel of light principle. So if he can appear as an angel of light, he can appear as a little child or anything else, or an orb, or, you know, shadow figure, or anything else.
Well, some really pivotal points there, Mark, and I appreciate you sharing those with us. And I just want to really highlight the fact that I think it's interesting and really, in some ways, almost admirable in a way that people that have investigated this have been able to come to these terms as it relates to the paranormal, because like you said, there's a lot going on here, and this is a phenomenon that we can't really have. It's very hard to get a grasp of the paranormal, and the fact that people have done enough investigation that they've been able to come up with these different ways to categorize these quote haunted encounters, these paranormal investigations. I appreciate where they're coming from, because they're trying to come at it from a place of help, and they're trying to kind of come at it from a scientific background. However, you had mentioned this, especially at the beginning, at the end of those 9 points, which is that even as good as all that sounds, this is, if the demonic is real, as many of these people believe, many paranormal investigators, and the demonic has the ability to mimic any type of haunt, then really there's really almost no way to distinguish between the demonic and a ghost, or a residual haunting. Really, a demonic being can be a substitute for any of those different encounters, and just the fact that it can happen one out of let's say a million times, I think already is concerning enough as it relates to trying to categorize these experiences in the paranormal. It's just so hard to figure out, something that the paranormal is so hard to get a grasp on, because obviously you and I believe that we're not supposed to dabble in this. And when you're dealing with demonic beings that have been here for at least thousands of years, and have incredible intelligence, and are have much more experience than us mortal humans that only live for maybe 70, 80 years, you're dealing with something that is very, very good at accomplishing their goal, which is mimicry and deceiving. So I just think it's again just unfortunate that this isn't touched on more, the idea of this mimicry aspect of the demonic realm, and just really thankful that we have a chance to cover it here.
Yeah, mimicry is such a key word, Alex. They if I may interject this, is, they were around 100 years ago. So some people, the better paranormal investigators, they'll have a historical team, they'll come in and do a history on the house, and just think what happens. The demons were around 100 years ago. They knew the grandparents, the great grandparents, what they looked like, what they sounded like, what they talked like. They could, and if they have a photo, if the family has a photo of great grandma, then don't you think that they can mimic great grandma, because they were there
Exactly.
120 years ago or whatever? But how profoundly deceptive, but how cruel of the evil one to take loved apparitions, mimicking apparition of loved ones, and overwhelming people's emotions, and then using that to open doors. And it just makes me weep for people, that they are falling for that. But that, when you mentioned mimicry a couple times, it just jolted me, because that is such a key ploy in their work of deception. Yeah.
Well, Mark, you stated, and I quote, "What we believe isn't just a few data points bouncing around in our head. What we believe is a commitment of our heart." So, can you explain the importance of that statement there and how it relates to our discussion as we wrap up today?
Yeah, maybe you can help me out with that one too.
Sure.
I was trying to, because I really I've grown to really value your insights, Alex.
Oh, thank you.
We, no, you're welcome. We all have worldviews. Um, they act like spectacles or glasses through which we view all of reality. And in a nutshell, worldview just essentially is like what we think about God, what we think about the universe and our relationship to both. And it involves a lot more than that, but it's a world and life view. And so people have a visceral commitment to their ultimate criterion, which is their worldview. It's how they see things. It's how they determine what is right and wrong, and it's formed over a lifetime from experience, from parents, environment, schooling, books we read, movies, and so forth. And a lot of it's caught more than taught. And but the point is, there's also love lines. Perhaps a person's family, had psychics in it, or mediums, or so on, or if your parents were um, ghost hunters themselves, and that sort of thing, then those love lines are hard to break. And the point is that um, the belief in ghosts and such is, again, it's not just like you said, I said, I guess, uh, a data point. There is there's emotional investment to it. I mean, you just recall your involvement, Alex, with Reiki. There was an emotional investment, um, financial as well, with many paranormal investigators spending thousands of dollars on equipment. But and then you have the camaraderie of the folks that become your friends, and all that in a ball of wax. It kind of becomes a person's purpose in life, or at least part of it, a big part of it. So it's this topic of ghosts is it goes deep, to into a person's belief system, and then into their heart, and what they believe about reality and about God, and so forth. Um, I'd love to get your insights.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that. And again, I know we talked a little bit about this in the last episode that you were on, which is the topic of worldviews, and you touched on that in your book. And I just love that part of the book and how important it is for people to really take a look at what their worldview is, and be aware of that as they're approaching anything in life. I think so often we don't take the time to stop, and especially in our busy lives, to really investigate how we're looking at things. And I think that's why we're seeing a lot of the problems that we have today. And I just want to add that I, as you mentioned, I was involved in Reiki and other parts of the paranormal, and it was incredibly challenging for me to leave that community because, like you said, I invested so much into it, and I had relationships there. I had a worldview there. I had my whole identity in the way that, the way I viewed the world as we're talking about with worldview, was wrapped up in a paranormal way of looking at things, or a new age way of looking at things. And when I came out of that, it was the most painful experience of my life, because I had to completely shift my reality. And with that shift came not only spiritual shift, emotional shift, but a physical one for me. I changed careers. I left a romantic relationship. I left the state, and it was very challenging. However, it was now, going through it was very challenging. But when I look back on it, I am so thankful that I did, because I would rather go through the pain that I went through there to get to the truth. And it makes me think about a Tony Robbins quote, and I'm going to change it a little bit, because he says, people will do more to avoid pain than they will to gain pleasure. And I think that you can shift that a little bit and say people will do more to avoid pain than they will to gain the truth or find the truth. And
Wow.
yeah, I just think it can be so challenging to accept it, because it's so painful. But there is a peace in accepting the truth that you cannot get doing anything else. If you're continuously going down, I don't mean to compare people that are in the, like myself, like I once was in the paranormal community or in the new age community and this, spiritualist community, to like somebody that is and has some kind of an addictive behavior or substance behavior. But you can be very comfortable being addicted to something that is not good for you, whether that's alcohol or we can go on and on. However, once you make that shift, you make that change in your mind, saying I don't want to do this anymore. It's going to be very, very painful to escape this habit. I don't want to do it anymore. I want to break free, and I want freedom in my life. It's going to take some time. It's going to take some time to change your behaviors. It's going to take time to change your thoughts. But I think it's all worth it. I not only do I think, I know it's all worth it. And I think that many people would agree with me that have taken that road, even though it's very, very challenging at first, that the freedom that you gain from approaching your life, approaching the truth, and approaching your life from a more healthy standpoint, a standpoint that allows you to see the world as God always wanted us to see it, which is, I don't mean to bring your title into this, but like through His way of looking at things, there's a peace that you cannot gain in any of the pleasures and the thrills. I think that so often that we find in the thrill seeking paranormal community, and so I just want to. And I think we can also even look at it from a biblical standpoint, which is the Pharisees were always trying to cut corners, and they were always looking at things from what was going to be maybe easier in the moment, but was not really living up to what God wanted them to do. And the truth is found in God's word. And I think that even though that's a little bit different, I think it kind of reflects on our discussion here. Is people will oftentimes kind of take the easy route, because this can be very painful to shift your vantage point. But I just want to tell people that it is so worth it in the end. And even if it takes a little bit longer than what you're wanting to break through that difficult moment, kind of being in the middle, stuck in the middle there, before you're getting to your goal of that final piece, and just kind of breaking away from your old lifestyle. It is so worth it. And yeah, so I just want to just really hit that home, because this is a topic that really, obviously it resonates with a lot of people, but in yourself, and it really resonates with me, just based off of my experiences.
Alex, can you say that the saying again, that it's easier, the one that you switched, Tony's, the one that you switched up?
Yeah. So people will do more to avoid pain than they will to gain the truth.
Wow, that is heavy.
Yeah. It just really made me think about that quote. And I had not thought about that before our discussion right now, but it just came to mind as we were talking there. So I thought it was appropriate.
Yeah.
Well, Mark, that really is all I have in terms of questions. Is there anything else that you want to share with our audience before we let them know where they can find the book and your YouTube?
I'm trying to think. Just want to say I love you guys, And thank you for listening in to Alex and myself. And thank you for the privilege of speaking to you. And though I don't know you personally, um, I hope that I came across with kindness and not with any, you know, know-it-allness or mean-spiritedness, because um, as the saying goes, I'm just one beggar showing other beggars where to find food, and that's Christ. And I have stumbled many times, and it's I just yearn that those of you who are honest seekers for truth, that you will, if you seek and ask, then you'll find the truth in Christ. And don't hesitate to contact Alex or myself if you have any questions. I love you guys and hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. And it's, as far as the book, Seeing Ghosts Through God's Eyes, I'm going to go ahead and put that up for those that are watching this. I'm going to put it on the screen. Seeing Ghosts Through God's Eyes. You can find that at Amazon.com. I cannot recommend that book enough. As I said the first time that we spoke, it was instrumental in me coming to the Lord and finding the truth as found in God's word. So I cannot recommend that book enough. Such a fascinating look at the ghost topic, and one that we very rarely see from that vantage point in the paranormal community. And another thing I wanted to share is we shared last time is Mark's email, in case you wanted to contact him. I have it up on the screen. I'm going to go ahead and just say it as well. If you have any questions for Mark, I know he just mentioned he'd love to hear from you, or any comments or anything. It's M as in Mary, HUN as in Nancy, N as in Nancy, E as in Edward, at AOL.com. And you can find Mark also on YouTube. Just type in his name, Mark Hunnemann, and that last name is HUNNEMANN. So Mark Hunnemann on YouTube. And I really hope that people will check him out there, because that a lot of what we talked about here today on the podcast, you can find there, and even in a little bit more depth as it relates to especially residual hauntings. Mark mentioned he has, I think it's a 10-part series on it. It's really fascinating. And he takes a look again at this topic from a way that I've never seen approach from that vantage point, and it's incredibly informative. So I really implore people to look at that. And I think that's I think that's all we have for today. But Mark, I just want to say again, from the bottom of my heart, I'm so appreciative of you coming on the podcast, and I think it's going to help out a lot of people. And God bless you, and we will definitely keep in touch.
Lord bless you too, and thank you again to you especially, but also to the audience. And thank you for the honor of being, and the fun for being on here. It's been great, and I pray that it does help maximum number of people. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Well, that is it for this week's show, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. And if you haven't had a chance to check out the first interview that Mark and I did way back in episode 4, I think you're going to really enjoy that. In that discussion, we talked a lot more in depth about his book, Seeing Ghosts Through God's Eyes, which I also highly recommend. And I don't know if there would be this podcast, by the way, if that book didn't exist. It helped me out a ton when I was getting out of the New Age. But yeah, we go a lot further into his book and really dissect that phenomena, the ghost phenomena and paranormal investigations, and look at how it's all demonic deception. So please check that out if you haven't had a chance to do that. And don't forget to send in your recommendations for maybe another author that you want me to interview, or another testimony that you've seen that you think would be a good fit for the podcast, or maybe your own testimony, to my email, spiritanswerspodcast@gmail.com. And thank you, as always, for your support for the podcast and for sharing this with somebody. I really appreciate it. And I will be praying for you as always, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Have a great week, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.